The air in Trauma Bay 1 was thick with the metallic tang of blood and the sterile bite of antiseptic. It was a symphony of controlled chaos, a rhythm Iris Thorne knew in her bones. Beep, hiss, whir. The metronome of the failing heart monitor was the lead instrument, counting down the final seconds of a life. Dr. Mark Cross, chief of trauma surgery, ran a hand over his perfectly sculpted hair, a gesture of frustration that broke his usual veneer of icy calm. Still no pulse. His voice cut through the noise, sharp and final. Paddles. A nurse slapped them into his hands. Charging to 300. Clear! The body on the table jumped, a gruesome, involuntary dance. The line on the monitor remained stubbornly, defiantly flat. A systole. Eris stood just outside the invisible circle of frantic activity, a ghost in blue scrubs. She was just a nurse, a new one, overqualified and underutilized, stocking supply carts and taking vitals. She kept her head down. She did her job. It was safer that way. "Come on, John Doe," Cross muttered, more to himself than to the man whose life was slipping through his gloved fingers. The patient had been brought in from a multi-car pileup on the interstate. No wallet, no phone, no identification, just a mess of shattered bones and internal bleeding. A man without a name, about to become a statistic. "Another round of epi," Cross commanded. A resident pushed the drug into the IV line. They waited. Nothing. The flat line held its vigil. "He's been down for 20 minutes, the resident, a young man named Peterson, said, his voice strained. "Massive internal hemorrhage. We can't get ahead of it." Cross stared at the monitor, his jaw tight. He hated losing. It was a personal affront. But he was also a pragmatist. He knew when the fight was over. "All right," he said, the word heavy with defeat. "Let's prepare to call it." The energy in the room shifted. The frantic pace slowed to a somber resignation. The team began to pull back, the symphony winding down to a single, mournful note. Iris felt a pull, an instinct she had suppressed for 3 long years. An itch in her hands. She had been pushing a restocking cart past the bay, a deliberately mundane task, when the call had come in. She had lingered, a moth drawn to a flame she knew would burn her. She saw the patient's arm, dangling off the side of the gurney. She saw the wrist. And the ink. It wasn't a commercial tattoo. It was a crude, field-expedient mark. A single, stylized raven's wing combined with a jagged line that looked like a heartbeat. Her own heart seized in her chest. She moved without thinking, her feet carrying her across the threshold of the trauma bay, breaking the sterile field, breaking her own carefully constructed rules. "Nurse, what are you doing?" Cross snapped, his attention diverted from the monitor to her. "Get out of here." She ignored him. Her eyes were locked on the tattoo. Her world narrowed to that small patch of skin, a ghost from a past she had buried under miles of concrete and years of silence. She reached out, her fingers tracing the familiar lines of the ink. It was real. "I know him," she said, her voice a low rasp she barely recognized. Cross scoffed. "He's a John Doe. Nobody knows him. Now step back before you contaminate my scene." Iris didn't step back. She leaned closer to the dying man, her lips near his ear. The world of beeping machines and barking orders fading into a dull hum. She let the name, a word locked away in the most secure vault of her memory, escape into the quiet space between them. Nightingale 1. It wasn't a name. It was a call sign, a key, a promise. On the monitor, the flat line wavered. A single, weak electrical impulse, a beat, then another. Bip, bip, bip. A ragged, thready rhythm appeared on the screen. Sinus bradycardia. Slow, but there. He had a pulse. The entire room froze. Every eye swiveled from the patient to the monitor, and then to the quiet nurse in the simple blue scrubs. Dr. Peterson's jaw hung open. What? How? Dr. Cross stared at her, his arrogance momentarily shattered and replaced by pure, unadulterated disbelief. He looked at the monitor, then back at her, as if trying to reconcile two impossible realities. "What did you say to him?" he demanded. Eris straightened up, her gaze finally meeting his. The timid nurse was gone. In her place was someone else, someone with eyes that had seen too much, eyes that held the calm, chilling authority of a commander in the field. "I reminded him he had a job to do," she said. Her voice was steady, devoid of emotion. "And it isn't dying on your table." She pointed at the monitor. "He's in bradycardic arrest from a tension pneumothorax, complicated by cardiac tamponade. The initial chest tube placement was too low. You missed the secondary bleed originating from the subclavian artery, which is compressing the superior vena cava." A statement of fact, not a suggestion. Cross stared at her, dumbfounded. "That's impossible." The fast scan was clear. "Your scan can't see the shrapnel," she said, her eyes already scanning the patient's torso, assessing, planning. "It's non-ferrous, ceramic, designed to be invisible." She knew the signature. She had dug pieces just like it out of a dozen men in a sand-dusted tent halfway around the world. "He needs a clamshell thoracotomy, now. Here." The room erupted in protest. "In the bay! We can't do that here," Peterson exclaimed. "We need a sterile OR, a full team." Cross found his voice, his authority reasserting itself. "Absolutely not. That procedure is a last resort, and it is never performed outside of an operating room. It's butchery." "It's the only thing that will save his life," Eris countered, her voice dropping, each word a piece of steel. "In the 3 minutes it takes you to get him to the OR, his heart will be crushed by the pressure in his chest. He'll be dead. For good this time." She looked from the patient to Cross, her gaze unwavering. "You can stand there and quote protocol while he dies, or you can hand me a number 10 scalpel and let me save him." What would you have done in Dr. Cross's position? Trust the established rules, or the word of a mysterious nurse who just seemingly brought a man back from the dead with 2 words? Silence descended, thick and heavy. The only sound was the slow, struggling beep of the heart monitor. It was a clock, ticking down. Cross looked at the monitor. The pressure was dropping again. The rhythm was faltering. She was right. He was losing him. He looked at the patient, a man he was about to pronounce dead. Then he looked at her. He saw the absolute certainty in her eyes, the complete lack of doubt. It wasn't arrogance. It was knowledge, hard-earned and absolute. He had spent his career climbing the ladder, mastering the intricate dance of civilian medicine, where rules and regulations were paramount. He was the chief. His word was law. But in that moment, he felt like a student. "Who the hell are you?" he asked, the question a raw whisper. Eris held his gaze. "I'm the person who's going to save your patient." The seconds stretched. The monitor beeped slower, fainter. Cross made a decision. It went against every fiber of his training, against every rule in the hospital charter. It was professional suicide. He turned to the stunned surgical tech. "Give her the scalpel," he ordered. The tech hesitated, looking at Cross for confirmation. "Now," Cross barked. The cold steel of the handle was placed in Eris's palm. It felt like coming home. The weight was familiar, an extension of her own hand. The timid nurse persona dissolved completely, burned away by the fire of necessity. "I need a giggly saw, rib spreaders, and 2 units of whole blood, on a pressure infuser, wide open," she commanded. Her voice filled the room, sharp and clear. There was no hesitation, no fear. The team, shocked into obedience by her sudden transformation and Cross's acquiescence, scrambled to follow her orders. They moved with a renewed urgency, their previous despair replaced by a fragile, terrified hope. "Peterson," she said, not looking at the young resident. "Start a central line in his left subclavian. We need another access point. And someone get me a headlamp and suction. Now." She turned back to the patient. "Nightingale 1, she said again, her voice softer now, a direct line to the man beneath the drapes. "Stay with me, Elias. Just stay with me." She placed the blade against his skin, just below the pectoral muscles. She paused for a fraction of a second, a silent prayer to God she no longer believed in. Then she made the cut. The incision was long and deep, from sternum to spine. Blood welled instantly. She worked with a speed that was terrifying and beautiful. Her hands were a blur of precise, economical movements. No wasted motion. Every action had a purpose. She sliced through muscle and tissue, exposing the rib cage. Saw. It was in her hand. She cut through the sternum with a grating crunch of bone, connecting the incision from the other side. A clamshell thoracotomy. A brutal, archaic procedure. Cross had called it butchery. In her hands, it was art. Spreaders. She placed the tool and cranked it open, cracking the chest wide like a book. The man's thoracic cavity was exposed to the open air of the trauma bay. His heart, squeezed and bruised, beat weakly. His lungs struggled to inflate. The team gasped. They had read about this in textbooks, seen diagrams. None had ever witnessed it outside of a controlled operating theater. Eris's eyes scanned the interior of the chest, her mind a supercomputer processing terabytes of data. "There," she said, pointing with the tip of a forceps. "Just like I said, pericardial sac is full. It's black. Cardiac tamponade. Blood was filling the sac around the heart, squeezing it, preventing it from beating properly." She took the scalpel again, and with a delicate, steady hand, she nicked the pericardium. A gush of dark, old blood spilled out, flooding the chest cavity. Suction! As the pressure was relieved, the heart muscle visibly shuddered and began to beat more forcefully. The rhythm on the monitor strengthened, the rate climbing from 40 to a more stable 70 beats per minute. "Blood pressure is coming up," Peterson announced, his voice filled with awe. But Eris wasn't celebrating. "That's only half the problem." Her fingers, impossibly gentle, probed deep into the chest cavity, behind the heart, near the great vessels. The team watched in hypnotic silence. She was like a bomb disposal expert, her touch both confident and infinitely careful. "I feel it," she murmured. "The fragment. It's wedged against the subclavian. Every time his heart beats, it's nicking the artery." This was the moment, the nexus of 1,000 variables. One wrong move, 1 millimeter of error, and the artery would shred. He would bleed out in seconds. "Cross," she said, her voice calm, almost conversational. "I need you to cross-clamp the aorta, but you only have 90 seconds once you do. Understood?" Dr. Mark Cross, the chief of surgery, the man who had dismissed her minutes ago, simply nodded. "Tell me when." "Stand by." Eris took a deep breath. She repositioned her hands, her fingers becoming her eyes in the bloody darkness of the man's chest. She could feel the sharp, ceramic edge of the shrapnel. She could feel the delicate, pulsing wall of the artery. "Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? The pressure in that trauma bay must have been immense." She visualized the anatomy, replaying a dozen similar procedures performed in the back of a shaking helicopter or on a dirt floor under the glare of a single bulb. "Okay, Elias," she whispered. "Time to come home. Cross. Clamp. Now." He moved in, applying the aortic clamp with practiced skill. A clock started ticking in Eris's head. 90 seconds. Her fingers closed around the shard of ceramic. It was slick with blood. She began to ease it out, her movement slow, deliberate, pulling it back along the path it had carved years ago. The artery pulsed against her knuckles, a fragile, living thing. 80 seconds. The shard snagged on a piece of tissue. Aris didn't force it. She rotated it slightly, feeling for the angle of least resistance. 70 seconds. "More suction," she ordered, her voice tight. "Keep the field clear." 60 seconds. The fragment came free. It was a wicked-looking piece of dark, non-reflective material about the size of her thumb. She dropped it onto the metal tray with a clatter. A fresh torrent of blood erupted from the hole in the artery. 50 seconds. She had anticipated this. Her other hand was already in position. With a Satinsky clamp, she seized the artery, pinching it shut. The bleeding slowed to a trickle. "Okay," she breathed. 40 seconds. "I need a 4-0 Proline suture." A needle was in her hand. Her fingers, slick with blood, moved with an impossible dexterity. She placed the first stitch, then the second. A running suture, closing the hole in the arterial wall. Her movements were a blur. 10 seconds. "Done," she said, tying off the last knot. "Release the aortic clamp." Cross released the pressure. They all watched, holding their breath. The suture line held. There was no new bleeding. The heart, now free and receiving full blood flow, beat with a strong, steady rhythm. The monitor confirmed it. Blood pressure 110/70. Heart rate 85. Stable. Aris stepped back from the table. She looked at the open chest, the stabilized patient, the stunned faces of the medical team. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving a hollow, shaking emptiness in its wake. She had done it. She had saved him. And she had exposed herself. For a long moment, the only sound was the steady, reassuring beep of the monitor. It was a sound of victory. Dr. Cross slowly removed his gloves, his eyes never leaving Aris. He walked around the table until he was standing in front of her. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep, humbling respect. "I have been a surgeon for 20 years, he said, his voice quiet, but carrying through the entire room. "I've been chief of trauma here for 10. In all that time, I have never seen anything like that." He took a breath. "I was wrong. I was arrogant. And I would have let that man die. You saved his life." He extended a hand. "Thank you." Aris looked at his outstretched hand, but didn't take it. She was looking past him, at the door, as if expecting someone to walk through it at any moment. "Get him to the OR, she said, her voice distant. "He needs a full washout and proper closure, and run a tox screen. Full panel." "Of course," Cross said, withdrawing his hand. He turned to the team. "You heard her. Let's move!" The room sprang back to life, a well-oiled machine once more, but this time it was humming to her tune. As they prepped the patient for transport, Cross turned back to Aris. "You have to tell me," he said. "The call sign, the shrapnel, that technique. No civilian surgeon knows things like that. Who are you?" Aris finally looked at him, and he saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the bone-deep weariness of a soldier who had been fighting a war for too long. "My name is Aris Thorne," she said, "and I used to be a doctor." The hours that followed were a blur. Aris gave a statement, a heavily redacted version of the truth. She claimed she'd served as a medic, that she'd seen similar wounds overseas. It was a flimsy story, and she knew it. But it was all she was willing to give. Cross, to his credit, didn't push. He expedited her transfer from nursing to the surgical department, effective immediately, citing a critical skills assessment. He understood on some level that she was a woman with a history she wasn't ready to share. For now, he was content to have her skill on his side. She found herself in a small, sterile on-call room, the first moment of quiet she'd had since she saw the raven's wing tattoo. She sank onto the narrow bed, her body trembling with the last vestiges of adrenaline. The past she had so carefully walled off was now breached. Sergeant Elias Vance, Nightingale 1, was alive and stable in the ICU, and her face, her name, her impossible surgical procedure were now part of an official hospital record. She had lit a beacon, and she had no doubt that something, somewhere, had seen the light. She must have drifted off because the next thing she knew, there was a soft knock on the door. It was Cross. He held 2 cups of vending machine coffee. "I thought you might need this," he said, handing one to her. She took it, the warmth a small comfort against the chill that had settled deep in her bones. "Thank you." He sat in the room's only other chair, the silence stretching between them. "His name is Sergeant Elias Vance," Cross said finally. "United States Marine Corps. Force Reconnaissance. His emergency contact was listed as the Department of Defense." Aris nodded, not surprised. He wouldn't have anyone else. "They're sending someone to..." "Liaise," Cross said, choosing his words carefully. "A Colonel Reed." The name hit Aris like a physical blow. The coffee cup slipped from her numb fingers, splashing across the sterile linoleum floor. Colonel Marcus Reed, the man who had given the order. The architect of the disaster. The man who had signed her death certificate, both literally and figuratively. Cross was on his feet instantly. "Are you all right?" She couldn't answer. Her breath was trapped in her lungs. She was back there, in the dust and the heat, the air thick with the smell of blood and cordite. The screams, the final garbled transmission. "Nightingale is down. I repeat, Nightingale is down. 0 survivors." "He's coming here," she managed to choke out. "He's the listed point of contact," Cross said, his brow furrowed with concern. "Aris, what is it? What's wrong?" "You have to get Vance out of here," she said, her voice urgent, desperate. "Now. Move him. Discharge him. I don't care. You have to get him away from Reed." "I can't do that," Cross said, confused. "He's my patient. He just came out of a massive thoracic surgery, and Reed is his commanding officer, or at least he was." "You don't understand," she said, grabbing his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Reed isn't coming here to check on his soldiers' welfare. He's coming to finish a job." The story came pouring out of her then. Not all of it, but enough. Operation Nightingale, a black site in the Syrian desert. A small elite medical team tasked with supporting clandestine operations. She was the surgeon in charge. Dr. Aris Thorne, call sign Nightingale. Elias Vance was part of the security detail, Nightingale 1. They were good, the best. They saved dozens of lives, soldiers from units that didn't officially exist, performing medical miracles in a glorified tent, until the final mission. They were tasked with saving a high-value informant who had been wounded during extraction. But the intelligence was bad. It was a trap. The informant was bait. The compound was swarmed. Reed, their commander, was overseeing the operation from a remote drone feed miles away. When the attack came, he panicked. He saw the mission as a failure, a stain on his perfect record. So he sanitized it. He declared the site compromised. He called in an airstrike on his own people. "He bombed us," Aris said, her voice hollow. "He bombed his own soldiers to cover up a failed operation. I was in the middle of operating on Vance. The first blast threw me across the tent. The roof collapsed. I was buried. I listened. I listened as my team, my friends, died around me." She had survived, miraculously. Buried under rubble, presumed dead. Vance had survived too, but was captured by enemy forces before being repatriated in a prisoner exchange months later, his memory of the event hazy from his injuries. The official report, signed by Reed, listed everyone at the Nightingale site as killed in action by enemy mortar fire. A neat, Tidy story. Medals were awarded posthumously. Aris had clawed her way out of the wreckage and run. She knew Reed's report was a lie. She knew he would never allow a living witness to his war crime to surface. So she became a ghost. She used her medical knowledge to create a new identity, disappearing into the civilian world, hiding in plain sight as a simple nurse, haunted by the faces of those she couldn't save. Vance must have remembered something, she finished, her voice trembling. That's why he was in that accident on the interstate. It wasn't an accident. It was an assassination attempt, and when it failed, they brought him here. Now Reed knows where we both are. Cross stared at her, his face pale. The world of protocols and peer-reviewed studies he inhabited had just collided with a brutal shadow world of black sites and state-sanctioned murder. My God, he whispered. A sharp, authoritative knock echoed on the door. Dr. Cross, a voice called from the hallway. Colonel Reed is here to see you. Aris's blood ran cold. He was here. Cross looked at Aris, then at the door. In his eyes, a new kind of resolve formed. He was no longer just a surgeon. He was a protector. Stay here, he said to her. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me. He walked out, closing the door behind him. Aris scrambled to lock it, her heart pounding against her ribs. She pressed her ear to the cool metal, listening. She could hear Cross's calm, professional tone, and then another voice. A voice she had only ever heard over a crackling radio, but one she would never forget. It was smooth, confident, and utterly chilling. Colonel Marcus Reed. Doctor, thank you for seeing me. Reed's voice oozed authority. I'm here to oversee the transfer of Sergeant Vance to a military facility. Walter Reed, to be specific. We have a transport team en route. I'm afraid that's not possible, Colonel, Cross replied, his tone firm. Sergeant Vance is in no condition to be moved. He's post-op from a highly traumatic emergency thoracotomy. Moving him could be fatal. There was a pause. A thoracotomy? In the ER? Your report was unconventional. It mentioned a nurse performed the procedure. We have a new surgical fellow, Cross lied smoothly. Dr. Thorne, an exceptional talent. She saved his life. Thorne, Reed repeated the name slowly, tasting it. I see. Well, her exceptional talent notwithstanding, my orders are to move the sergeant. The aircraft is equipped with a full medical suite. He will be fine. With all due respect, Colonel, as his primary physician, I am refusing the transfer, Cross stated. It constitutes a violation of my patient's safety and my medical ethics. Unless you have a court order signed by a federal judge, he's not going anywhere. The false charm in Reed's voice evaporated. Doctor, you seem to be under the impression that you are in a position to negotiate. You are not. This is a matter of national security. That man in your ICU is a decorated Marine, and he is coming with me. Am I clear? Aris could feel the threat hanging in the air. This was no longer a medical debate. It was a confrontation. She had to do something. Running was no longer an option. Reed would hunt her to the ends of the earth, and he would kill Elias Vance to ensure his silence. She had brought this fight to Cross's hospital. It was her duty to finish it. She looked around the small on-call room. There was nothing. A bed, a chair, a sink. No weapons, no escape. Her mind, honed by years of high-stakes improvisation, raced. She thought about Reed, a man obsessed with his record, with appearances. A man who operated in the shadows. His greatest fear was exposure. Light. That was the weapon she needed. She unlocked the door and slipped out, moving silently down the hallway in the opposite direction of the ICU nurses' station, where Cross and Reed were facing off. She knew the hospital's layout, every corridor, every supply closet. She found what she was looking for in a small administrative office. A tablet computer, logged into the hospital's internal network. She began typing, her fingers flying across the screen. Meanwhile, the tension at the nurses' station had escalated. 2 large men in dark suits had appeared behind Reed. They weren't soldiers. They were government agents, the kind who didn't carry badges. "Dr. Cross," Reed said, his voice dangerously low. "Let me be very clear. My team is going to walk down that hall, enter Sergeant Vance's room, and escort him out of this hospital. You can either step aside, or you can be removed. The choice is yours." Cross stood his ground, placing himself squarely in the hallway, blocking their path. Several other doctors and nurses, drawn by the confrontation, stood behind him, a silent wall of blue and white scrubs. "You are not touching my patient," Cross said, his voice ringing with conviction. Reed chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "You have a hero complex, Doctor. It's going to get you killed." He nodded to his men. They started forward. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Colonel." Aris's voice cut through the tension. She stepped into the hallway from the other end, holding the tablet in her hands. She looked different. The fear was gone. She was once again the commander of Trauma Bay 1, the woman who stared death in the face and didn't blink. Reed turned, and his eyes widened in genuine shock as he saw her. He had seen the name on the report, but he couldn't have truly believed it. A ghost from his past, standing before him. "Dr. Thorne," he said, recovering quickly. "So the rumors of your demise were greatly exaggerated." "You made sure of that," she replied, her voice cold. "Just like you made sure the official report on Operation Nightingale was a work of fiction." Reed's face darkened. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Aris said. She held up the tablet. "This is Sergeant Vance's medical chart. I've just added a new entry. A full psychiatric evaluation, co-signed by Dr. Cross, detailing Vance's recovered memories from the incident. Memories of you, Colonel. Memories of you giving the order to fire on your own position." Reed's eyes narrowed. "A fabricated report. It's my word against a shell-shocked soldier and a disgraced, rogue medic." "It's more than that," Aris said, her finger hovering over the screen. "I've also attached a full audio file, a recording of our little conversation just now. The part where you threatened a civilian doctor and admitted this was a matter of national security. And I've just sent this entire updated medical file to a secure server. The server belongs to a journalist at the New York Times, a very good one. He specializes in military cover-ups." It was a bluff, a desperate, wild bluff. There was no recording. There was no journalist. But Reed didn't know that. "Right now," Aris continued, her voice steady, "that file is sitting in his inbox, flagged as urgent. The only thing stopping him from opening it is a recall command that I have 2 minutes to enter. If I don't, he opens it. And your career, your life, is over." She took a step forward. "So here's what's going to happen. You and your men are going to turn around and walk out of this hospital. You are going to erase every record of Elias Vance and Aris Thorne from whatever dark corner of the government you crawled out of. You will forget we exist. In return, I'll recall the email, and you get to walk away." Reed stared at her, his mind racing, weighing the odds. He looked at her eyes and saw no deception. He saw the cold, hard certainty of a player who was holding a winning hand and was willing to burn the whole table down. He had built his entire life on a foundation of carefully constructed lies. She was threatening to pull the cornerstone. "You're bluffing," he hissed. "Am I?" she countered. "You murdered 12 of your own people to protect your career. Are you willing to bet that career on the chance that I'm lying? You have 90 seconds, Colonel. Just like the 90 seconds I had to save Elias's life. The clock is ticking. The hallway was utterly silent. Cross and his team watched, mesmerized. Reed's men looked at him, awaiting orders. The colonel's face was a mask of fury. He was a predator. Cornered. He took a step toward her, his hand twitching, as if reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Aris didn't flinch. She simply met his gaze and tapped her finger on the tablet screen. 60 seconds. Reed stopped. The bluff was perfect. He couldn't take the risk. Even a hint of such a scandal would destroy him. He turned, his movements stiff with rage. "This isn't over," he snarled at her. "Yes, it is," Aris said quietly. "It's been over for 3 years. You just didn't know it." Without another word, Colonel Reed turned and strode down the hall, his men falling in behind him. They disappeared through the exit doors, vanishing back into the shadows from which they came. Aris watched them go, her body rigid. Only when the doors swung shut did she allow herself to breathe. The tablet slipped from her trembling hands and clattered to the floor. Cross rushed to her side. "That was the most incredible thing I have ever seen. The journalist, the recording." "There was no recording," she said, leaning against the wall for support. "There's no journalist. I just updated his chart to say he was allergic to penicillin." Cross stared at her. Then he let out a laugh, a deep, genuine laugh of relief and admiration. "Good God, Thorne, you are one of a kind." In the weeks that followed, the hospital returned to a semblance of normalcy, but nothing was ever the same. The story of the quiet nurse who performed a clamshell thoracotomy in the ER and faced down a government spook became the stuff of legend. Elias Vance made a full recovery. When he was finally able to speak, he confirmed everything Aris had said. He remembered the chaos, the betrayal, and the sound of Reed's voice over the radio giving the kill order. He also remembered Aris, his nightingale, fighting to save him as the world came down around them. He owed her his life. Twice. For Aris, something had shifted. The ghost had been forced into the light, and she found that the sun didn't burn her. For the first time in years, she wasn't looking over her shoulder. She wasn't hiding. One afternoon, Dr. Cross called her into his office. The hospital administrator, a stern woman named Ms. Albright, was there as well. "Dr. Thorne," Albright began, not bothering with pleasantries. "We have reviewed your case. Your actions in the trauma bay were an unprecedented breach of protocol. Your subsequent confrontation with a government official put this entire hospital at risk." Aris braced herself. She was about to be fired. It was inevitable. "However," Albright continued, a rare smile touching her lips, "they were also the most brilliant display of medical skill and personal courage this board has ever had the privilege of witnessing. The board has unanimously approved a new initiative." She slid a folder across the desk. Aris opened it. The title on the top page read, "The Thorne Center for Advanced Trauma and Veteran Care." "We want to build a new wing," Cross explained, his voice filled with excitement. "A specialized unit dedicated to treating the complex, often misdiagnosed injuries our veterans bring home, physical and psychological. We want to combine cutting-edge civilian tech with the kind of field-tested, improvisational medicine you practice. And we want you to run it," Albright finished, "as director, with full autonomy." Aris stared at the proposal, at her name printed in bold letters. Director. It was a life she never thought she would have again. A purpose. A way to honor the team she had lost. She looked at Cross, and then at Albright. She saw respect in their eyes. Trust. "I spent 3 years trying to forget who I was. I buried Dr. Aris Thorne under layers of fear and grief. I thought being a ghost was the only way to survive. But hiding isn't living. The moment I saw Elias on that table, I knew the past was never truly gone. It lives inside you. You can either let it be a tomb, or you can build a future on its foundations." She closed the folder and pushed it back across the desk. Cross's face fell. "You're not accepting." "No," Oris said, a slow smile spreading across her face for the first time in years. "I'm just making a correction." She took a pen, crossed out the name on the proposal, and wrote a new one, the Nightingale Center. "It wasn't just my name," she said, her voice clear and strong. "It was our name. It's time they all came home." She stood up, no longer a nurse, no longer a ghost, but a doctor, a leader, reborn in the crucible of a trauma bay. She had found her voice, her purpose, and her name, and this time, she would make sure it was never silenced again.